Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It's June 19th, 2017. It's a little bit early in the morning, and we're very excited to be bringing you kind of a little bit of an extemporaneous interview. A couple days ago, Amy Grubbs and some of the OSF board members and I all noticed an article that was posted to the internet called "They Can Leave the Church, but They Can't Leave the Church Alone." And we noticed that it was gaining a lot of traction, that a lot of people resonated with the article. And the article was written by Brynne Thomas Gant, who has actually been on Mormon Transitions, Mormon Stories before. She was actually one of the first people, along with her husband Jared, that we interviewed about experiencing a Mormon religious transition. And it was great to have her. And so I recognized the little image there. And we thought it's such a common issue, it's such a common topic, that we would go ahead and include it as part of the Mormon Stories, Mormon Transitions kind of discussion. So this kind of fits both categories. But today, this early morning on a Monday, we're going to be doing a Facebook Live discussion with Brynne about the article. For those of you who are interested, we've posted a link to the article in the description. I'll have Amy maybe post a link to the article in the comments as well on the Facebook live stream. And what we hope to do is just have a discussion about this. I don't know if we call it a meme or stereotype or what exactly we should call it. But it's basically this idea that so many Orthodox believing Mormons have, that when people lose their faith in the church, they can't just sort of go on and build a happy, healthy, productive life, but instead they leave the church, but they can't leave it alone. I believe the original phrase was coined by Neil A. Maxwell. I don't know that for sure, but my memory is that he popularized that phrase. He was an apostle who really liked to write, and whose prose, when I was a believing member, felt really poetic and scholarly. So I don't know, for those of you who remember Neil A. Maxwell, a little bit of a shout out to him. But that's going to be what our topic is today. And before we jump in, as always, we just want to make people aware of some of the events coming up, sponsored by the Open Stories Foundation. So we'll talk about them very briefly. July 7th and 8th, that's in about 3 weeks. We're going to be in Dallas, Texas, doing a full retreat there. We're going to have some swimming. We're going to have some barbecue, but most importantly, karaoke. No, not karaoke. Most importantly, we're going to be helping people, Mormons who are struggling to navigate a transition, whether they're staying in the church or trying to leave. In these retreats and workshops, we talk about how to have healthy relationships, how to communicate more effectively with believing family and friends. We talk about spirituality or secular spirituality. We talk about mental health, healthy marriage, all sorts of things, how to find community. And that's what these events are about. So if you want to join us July 7th and 8th, please email us at mormonstories@gmail.com. There are scholarships available to all these events. So if the price doesn't seem affordable to you for some reason, you can email us at mormonstories@gmail.com and request a scholarship. Send in a description of why you want to attend, what your needs are, and we'll find donors to make it so you can attend these events. So please do check these events out. We also, August 11th and 12th, are going to be doing our very first mixed faith marriage retreat with Julie D'Azevedo-Hanks. She's a believing active Mormon. She's a therapist in Salt Lake City. And this is an important event because we're going to have half believers, half non-believers. No one's going to feel overwhelmed. And we're going to do our best to save marriages and keep families from being split up over these difficult issues. It's going to be 2 full days. So please check that out. August 11th to 12th, Mixed Faith Marriage Retreat. September 14th and 15th, we'll be in Seattle, Washington. October 20th to 22nd in Sydney, Australia. November 9th through 10th in San Francisco Bay Area. And of course, if you're interested in going on a cruise, this will be the first cruise I've ever gone on. Our listeners have requested that we hold a cruise to have some fun and to do some healing. So October 2018, we'll be doing a cruise to the Bahamas, and we'd love people to come. All the proceeds from these events go to support the Open Stories Foundation, the staff, the mission. I don't get paid any extra money for these events. They're purely to support what we do with the nonprofit. And none of your donations to OSF are used to fund these events. These events are all self-funded by the people who register. So anyway, we would love to have you come. We would love to have you attend. And we're grateful to everyone who donates to the Open Stories Foundation that makes these podcasts and these events possible. Just one more thing about that. I'll just say that, it's one thing to deconstruct one's testimony, but as the article that we're going to be discussing today really helps illustrate, it's a whole other thing to build a new life after you've decided that Mormon orthodoxy doesn't work for you. And whether that's in the church or out of the church, the Open Stories Foundation exists to help people through that difficult transition. And so we feel like it would be derelict in our duties to just be a part of people's faith deconstruction. We feel like it's really important to also be a part of helping people build healthy, happy lives and relationships. And so that's what we're about. So if you support the Open Stories Foundation, if you love these podcasts, if you love these events, please consider donating a monthly donation of $10 or $25 a month or whatever you can afford. We're fully transparent in our finances to the extent that the law requires, and we even go above and beyond that. We've been transparent since the beginning, and we're going to always be transparent. And your support is what makes it all possible. So thanks for your patience as we talk about some of that business. And now, without any further ado, we are going to welcome to the show Brynne Thomas Gant. Brynne is an attorney. Brynne is a mother of 2 children. She's married to Jared Gant, who is a photographer, a professional photographer, and she lives in Colorado. Brynne, welcome back to Mormon Stories, Mormon Transitions. It's so great to have you.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Tell us a little bit about your background. Just what did I miss in your bio that I should mention?
Well, you mentioned Jared, and we met in high school. We've been together a long time. We've been married 10 years, and we have 2 kids. We have one 6-year-old girl who's crazy and hyper and excited about everything and very, very passionate. And then we have one almost 2-year-old boy who's very, very, very calm and sweet. So they're awesome. We live in Colorado. We've been here since 2013, and we love it here. That's us. Jared's a wedding photographer, probably one of the top 10 in the country, I think. And I'm an attorney for pay, but other things for not pay.
You say he's one of the top 10 photographers in the country?
I think so. Wedding photographers. Wedding photographers. Clearly I'm a little bit biased, but
okay.
No, he's very, very good. So.
All right. Well, it's great to have you back, Brynne.
Thanks.
I didn't know what type of reception we'd have, but we have 107 people right now connected to Facebook Live. And that's exciting. And one of the reasons we do this on Facebook Live is to get feedback from our listeners. We think these discussions are much more rich when people can contribute and collaborate real time. And so we want to encourage those of you who are joining us on Facebook Live, check out the article by Brynne. You can click on it in the description or in the comments. Read through it if you haven't already. And what we would love is to have people actually contribute questions or comments or stories to this discussion. And what I'll do is I will read those comments and questions as we go and incorporate them in. Julie's joining us. Joyce, I think Hans Matson is joining us. Chelsea, says she loved your article, Brynne. I saw David Bokovoy joining. Someone said the light is distracting, so I may close my blinds. That's good to know. Logan says this is an important topic. And Patricia is joining us from Colorado. All right. So, Brynne, to begin in this discussion, why don't we start a little bit with kind of talk a minute about your commitment to the church and what it meant to you before kind of things went wrong. Just talk about what the church meant to you.
Well, it's best if I start out early then, because I think, you talk about the Nephi Syndrome. I think I had that to the nth degree. I was the youngest of 8 kids, and growing up, I recall being really the only super Orthodox believing kid in my family. My parents were very active, but all my siblings would, whine about going to church. They didn't want to go. We had to give them incentives to make them go. And I was one of those that I remember as a probably 6-year-old thinking, I will go every Sunday for the rest of my life. Like, it's just sort of dawned on me, like, this is something I will do forever. And I don't know if I took it for granted a little bit, but I grew in my testimony sort of in a very different way than I think a lot of people do. And I was upset by that often. And what I mean by a different way is it was very logical. I didn't have a lot of experiences where something really sort of supernatural happened to me. And so when I was annoyed with that, I would talk to my mom about it. And I remember her just sort of comforting me, saying, don't worry about it. Your testimony is something that you just always had. So I sort of took that and ran with it. But then I remember as like a 9 or 10-year-old reading the Book of Mormon all the way through for the first time. And I tried that promise and nothing happened.
How old? How old were you?
I think I was 9.
Wow, that's young.
9 or 10.
That is super young.
Yeah, I didn't realize that at the time because, as a family, we had read probably 3 times the Book of Mormon together at that point.
What state were you raised in?
Utah.
Okay.
Utah County in Orem.
Okay.
So, but I read it and I tried this Moroni's promise and I was like, I'm sure I have the hope. Like, I know I want this to be true. And I'm sure I'm acting on the things I need to be acting on. So what's going on? Like, why am I not feeling anything? So again, I talked to my mom and she comforted me, which at the time was very helpful. She said, everybody gets their testimony differently. And it's not going to feel like a stark contrast for you because you've always believed it. So I was like, okay, that makes sense. Anyway, but so I took that and I did all the things that I was maybe a little more black and white than I should have been. I was like, I fell off the bandwagon of scripture reading for a little bit, but I started in 7th grade and I read every day. I didn't miss a single day until about a year and a half ago.
Oh my goodness, that is amazing.
Yeah, I mean,
that's a level of scrupulosity that I think is not even in, I don't know, in the 95th percentile. It's got to be in the 99th percentile.
I mean, I read the Old Testament, so there you go.
Wow. Yeah.
But,
so you read the Book of Mormon every day for what, 15, 20 years?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That and, I mean, not just the Book of Mormon. I went through all the scriptures and went to church every week. I read the conference edition of the Ensign after watching all of conference. The month that it came out, I read the other Ensign's articles every month. I mean, I participated in everything. So I fasted, all of it.
Okay. So anything noteworthy about your sort of teenage years or college years that are an important part of this whole story?
Probably, yeah, because so when I talk in my in the little thing I wrote, I talk about some of the guilt that people feel that they didn't need to feel. And I did, as so let me back up a little bit because there's a little bit of a precursor. And so I was the victim of an attempted sex assault as a kid by a stranger. And that I didn't go to therapy for it. And so I ended up sort of making my own sense of it. And that painted my sexuality in like junior high and high school. And so I was very much wanting sexual attention because I felt sort of a connection to it being in a a way to show that you were loved. And at the same time, I was trying to be very, very LDS. And so the first part of those high school years and junior high years being sort of torn religiously was when people started asking me out before I was 16. And so I remember sort of reasoning to myself, well, is going out with someone really the same as dating someone? And I knew it was semantics and that it was really the same thing, but I kind of tried to justify it. So I had a little boyfriend in 8th grade. We didn't really do anything sexually. And then I had a couple other boyfriends, and then I met Jared. And we tried real hard to be great. We were pretty dang chaste, but
in high school? Did you get meet in high school? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he went to junior high with me.
Wow.
And I always joke because he's circled in my yearbook. I highlighted him, and I think I wrote hot over his name.
Nice.
But that was like 7th grade. And so we started dating more in the 11th grade. Anyway, so but mine and his relationship was really a lot of guilt for me. Lots and lots of guilt, especially because he seemed to be more stalwart than I was. And so to me, that was backward and it was all wrong. And like, I just felt real bad about it. And I remember anytime he and I kind of got carried away, we'd stop and we'd pray together. We were that annoying couple that like wouldn't hang out with people that would swear. And anyway, so lots and lots of guilt from that. That was the only kind of derailing part of it. And I got so depressed that I did get into like a really bad clinical depression. But other than
around
that,
what age? Around what age?
So middle of 11th grade through 12th grade.
And
yeah.
Did you have ways to kind of self-medicate that depression? What were the ways that you coped?
I mean, Jared was the way I coped, unfortunately. So it was sort of paradoxical there. Yeah, I mean, as far as coping, like we would just talk things out.
Okay, that sounds healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you got clinically depressed 11th to 12th grade. How'd you get out of that, or what happened?
So Jared left on his mission, and well, before that, I went out to visit him. He lived in Florida. His dad did, so he was here during the school years, and he was there in the summer. And I'd gone out the previous summer for several weeks, and then I went out 12th grade summer while he was getting ready for mission. And he went on like a mission prep camp thing and left me at his home for like a day and a half. And I was super duper introverted, very, very shy. So I had a hard time kind of chatting with his stepmom. So instead I read 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens, which actually was very helpful, I thought.
That's a great book.
So,
that's a great book. Yeah.
Yeah. So I ended up just sort of little by little, when you're depressed, the hardest thing in the world is to like get out of bed and like do something. So I would just try very small things. Like, I'm going to wake up today, I'm going to make a breakfast that's not cereal. And it felt empowering, and it kind of reminded me about what I liked about life. Or I'd go rent a new movie, which I didn't do often because I was so stingy about what I was allowed to watch. And it would be very entertaining to me, and that would make me feel like, okay, there is color in life. There's things in life that are worth living for, So little by little, I kind of followed the steps in that book, tried to be a little bit productive each day. And I think as I started doing that more and got out into the community more, I started college. That helped.
And you associate that depression with the guilt you felt for sometimes, being more romantic with Jared than what the church allowed.
I do. I think it's multifaceted for anybody.
Sure.
A lot of it was issues with sleep, but even the issues with sleep were also caused by some of the guilt. But yeah, I mean, that was the number one thing that was always on my mind. Like, I'm becoming the thing that I hated. I sort of compared myself to like the abuse that I'd suffered before. And I was like, I'm becoming the thing that's, tempting Jared or, bringing him down or whatever. So yeah, that was hard.
And the way that the messages the church sends to young women about quote the law of chastity really do put an extra burden on the female, don't they?
I mean, I don't know if it's always on purpose, but I know that church members spread around things that make you feel that way for sure. I mean, I remember thinking in junior high that it was a doctrine that if you purposefully tempted somebody and they had a bad thought, that it was your fault, not theirs. Like it was your sin.
It was the female's fault.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a lot of pressure, especially when you're so intense about the church being true and trying to live it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm guessing you guys weren't going crazy. It was probably just normal teen stuff, right?
Yeah. I mean, we married in the temple and we were worthy of that. So yeah.
Right. Okay. So Jared goes on his mission. What else about your story do you want to talk about before things started unraveling?
I mean, I told you I'm an open library, so there's so much to say. I don't know. I mean, if you have something specific you want to know.
So did you go to college while he was on his mission, or? I
did, yeah. So we stayed together. We fasted and prayed about it to decide whether it was the right decision to stay together while he was gone. And I did decide that. And so I went to college. I was really non-traditional, I should say that. Some of my dates in my childhood are a little mixed up because I didn't go to school with grade levels. And we didn't have the kinds of assignments where you're writing the date each day. And so I was age mixing in a lot of my childhood. So to get into college, because I had not really gone full time to high school or anything, I didn't graduate from high school. I just went to a summer semester. So I applied to BYU as a homeschool student, and then gave him my transcripts, explained why some of my classes were not the best grades ever because I hadn't cared about them in high school. And then after that semester, then I went full time to BYU. I got in full time. So that's what I was doing the first year of him being gone. And then I continued with college and just, making friends and specifically not dating anybody else until he got back.
Okay. Checking in with our listeners on the topic of depression. Logan writes, people say just do something to make yourself happy. When he was depressed, and he says sometimes I would consider it an accomplishment to want to wake up and get dressed. Do you relate to that, Logan? Or Brynne, do you relate to Logan?
Yeah, for sure. I think you just sit there and you kind of feel like the walls are closing on you. You don't want to do anything because nothing's worth doing. And to me, probably because I'm so logically wired, I got myself into all sorts of circles logically. I mean, I'm just sitting here thinking, what do we live for? Like, why, people get excited about stuff, but why? And it was just on and on and on in my head. And yeah, it just made it hard to want to do anything. Everything seemed silly.
Chris writes, love and guilt, arg, breaks my heart. That's what Chris writes. Logan also asks, what, if any, difference did you see while reading the Book of Mormon versus other scriptures? Was the Book of Mormon or other scripture reading helpful to you during the time?
Like during the time of this depression?
Yeah. Did it help you or hurt you during the depression?
It did, but not for the reason I think so many people think. I actually had a friend in junior high sort of have a dream and come and tell me about it. And that's what started my scripture reading. So when I say I didn't miss a day, I kind of attribute it to this friend that was like, hey, I see that you're starting to kind of want to be with these boys. And I had this, dream about us. And I just want you to know, I want you to stay stalwart, basically. And so, that's really what started my scripture reading. And what I think helped me with the depression was the habit. Not necessarily always the words that I was reading, because sometimes they didn't really apply or I didn't understand them. But because I was doing a thing every day that felt responsible and that sort of kept me on a schedule, for me, that's what helped the most.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Aubrey asks, do you resent giving up that much time to reading the scriptures? That's a lot of time, she writes.
I haven't thought about that being something I resented, but I mean, in as far as it's the time frame, no, but the fact of like trying to make sense of the world through what I now see as like random scriptures. Yeah. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So, did your guilt alleviate when Jared was on his mission because you didn't have that stress kind of wearing down on you?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Initially, I felt bad because I felt like he had been the strong one. And so I never had the chance to be the strong one again. And now it was just by default that I was being strong. And so I didn't feel real great about that. But that soon passed. And I had 2 years of us specifically trying real hard to grow at the same spiritual speed. And so I was really diving into, I read the Book of Mormon like 3 times in that year. I read Isaiah with like my little Isaiah companion. And so, yeah, that felt better.
How much did you date again while he was gone?
I didn't.
Didn't date. You just put yourself in cold storage, as Saturday's Warrior calls it.
I got tricked into 2 dates where someone was like, hey, do you want to come and hang out with my friends? And what he meant was my friend and my friend's girlfriend, and I'll pay for you. But other than that, no.
Did you confess your sins to your bishop?
Yes.
Your sins. How did that go?
Not great. I think we did it twice. Like, we confessed twice, which the first thing is, as a teenager, I was given this impression that when you do something wrong, it's like this one-time thing. And then you go in and talk to your bishop, and then you feel better, and then you don't do it anymore. And I think they don't do a great job explaining that most of the time, the thing that people struggle with is going to just keep on happening. And then you're like thinking, oh, like, all of the former sins have returned, and now it was all for nothing. So it didn't go well because we went in and talked, and there wasn't really any plan put in place for like, here's how we help you feel better from this. It was just like, okay, I just told you, and now I feel embarrassed that I told you.
Oftentimes they'll tell you can't take the sacrament, or something like that.
Yeah. So I was a little tricky. They said I couldn't take the sacrament, and I thought, okay, that's because of me and my worthiness, but other people don't need to know that. So I took my little water cup and I poured it out, and then I took my piece of bread and I held it in my hand.
Oh my goodness, I've never heard of that before.
I thought, this isn't about public shame, so why should anybody else have to know that I'm not taking the sacrament? So
you pour the water out in your hand?
I can't remember where I poured it. I know I didn't drink it because I would feel so bad if I got even a drop in my mouth, but I took the cup. I think I'd like purposely spilled it. You know what I mean?
Like as you're taking the cup out, you kind of spill it and then pretend you're drinking it. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that shows a lot of conflict for a kid, because you feel that intense guilt, but you don't want to be publicly shamed, right? I mean,
right.
What 16, 17-year-old wants to be publicly shamed?
Right.
As dirty, right?
Right.
Yeah. And then the bread you just kind of tuck in your pocket or something.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I thought I kind of even made more of it than that. I was like, here, I'm going to have this crust, and it's going to be a symbol to me, and I can hold it all day, and I can remember it, so I kind of used it to my benefit, I guess, in trying to heal and repent. It was a little symbolic reminder.
Sure. All right. So when Jared got home, what happened?
He got home. So like I said, his dad lived in Florida and his mom lived in Utah. So he had a 1-day layover here in Utah, and I went to that. I went and hung out with him for that with his mom. She had previously let me come to her house for like Mother's Day and things to talk to him. And then he went to Florida while I did my finals, and I flew out there, I want to say like 2 weeks later. And the day I got there, I had been on a red-eye flight and was kind of out of it. And he had this whole like Mormon proposal. And I say Mormon because I'm thinking like, you set up the whole day and you have cute little things and little like gifts that you gave, and then you propose, right? So he had asked an antique shop to stay open late and kind of close to the public, but leave it open to us. And they had a little restaurant there. And then he had bought a different little symbolic present for each meal that was brought out, or each part of the meal. And the last one was the wedding ring. And so he proposed to me that day. And we had already been talking on the phone about all of the wedding plans. So we got married February 18th. He proposed December 19th.
Wow.
Yeah.
Super intense.
Yep. In some circles.
And you were how old?
At that time, 21.
Okay. So not like 18, but still super young, right?
Right.
And okay, so how long have you guys been married?
10 years.
Okay, so you've been married 10 years.
Hmm.
Um, to what extent were you guys just a normal, faithful couple? I mean, you did go to law school, so that's not normal. So just talk about in what ways you were and were not typical Orthodox couples.
So even that part of it, John was actually pretty typical because I had a patriarchal blessing that basically told me I was going to grad school. So I think that's probably super rare, but
Oh, wow.
yeah, I mean,
Well,
it
that
said,
kind of makes it simple, doesn't it?
yeah. So um, we knew that I wanted to do that, and I got invited to this law school luncheon as an undergrad, and they were trying to kind of recruit some women to be in the law school, and so it was like a Women in the Law lecture series.
This is J. Reuben Clark Law School at BYU.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I loved that series, and I thought, this is perfect. Like, I don't know why I didn't think of law school before. I never stopped debating and thinking and talking. So I went, and I loved it. We had our first kid in law school.
Whoa.
So that was a little different.
What year?
The 1L year.
You were a 1L with a
Yeah.
baby.
Yep. There were 3 of us.
That's like
So.
Grace Kelly dancing backwards in high heels. You know what I mean? It's just, how do you survive law school with a baby?
You know what? I think sometimes that it was easier because people freak out so much about their studies in law school. And I think at some point they're giving like 90% effort for 10% return on investment. And when you have something to distract you, you end up doing the fundamentals. And then I think you cut the fat, so to speak, like, you know what I mean? And then BYU made it easy because they actually have these little rooms where you can go in and like nurse the baby and stuff and watch on the screen live your lecture. So that was really helpful.
That's super nice.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that you weren't the only pregnant or mom in law school, I'm guessing.
No, that for the 1L year, there were 3 of us. And then one of them, I think she ended up having 2 more kiddos in law school. At least one. And I feel like it was 2.
Not to mention husbands who have little children as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So, so you go to law school. Talk about, between law school and eventually you guys having kind of a, let's just say, a faith crisis. Was there anything significant that happened that's kind of worth mentioning that feeds into the crisis you guys had?
I think probably, yeah. So branching off of the depression that I felt when we got married, that always comes back a little bit when when anybody I think that's been sexually victimized has issues when they get married. Maybe not anybody, but a lot of people that I've met do. And that was certainly true for us. And so I ended up going to therapy and working through that. And the main thing that I realized from the therapy, and I should know, I was victimized more than just the one attempt. There were lots of other little things and at least one other big thing. So for me, the thing I learned from therapy was that I was a very black and white thinker. I was an all or nothing thinker. And unfortunately, I'd really done a lot of all or nothing conclusory work, like building up these conclusions in my head while Jared was on the mission trying to be super duper righteous. And I was extremely hypervigilant. Like, we didn't watch almost any media. I went like a year and a half or 2 years without any TV at all. And wow. So trying to break that down though, it took a long time, but I finally realized how much of an all or nothing thinker I was with regard to that. And so then I started applying it all over the place. Like, well, am I all or nothing thinking about the church? Am I all or nothing thinking about, what I think about people in this situation or whatever? So that, and then law school piggybacked right on top of that. And law school is like one of my favorite things I've ever done. And I would highly recommend it to anybody. I mean, it was just awesome. And so the teachers were really respectful and the discussion was really open. And it was all about everything that I already do in my head, which is just like open debate and open discussion. And it just really opened my worldview even more. So now I'm not an all or nothing thinker. At this time when I'm going through law school, really focusing on that and just thinking very broadly. So yeah, that would have been, one of the big precursors to me being open to Jared's transition.
Got it. Okay. And as I was looking through the comments, did I hear you say that you experienced some sort of forms of sexual assault more than one time?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
As a little kid, and then lots of little things which I wouldn't have called sexual assault before, but now I do. Just random groping, random people ogling, talking, touching me all the time.
And as I read through your article, I see a little bit of that reflected in some of the comments you made in your article, which we'll get to. Did that increase your interest in law at all, to be able to somehow protect women, or was that even something that occurred to you?
I think so, because I was real disappointed in the prosecutorial side of my case. So the attempted sex assault, the stranger broke into our house legitimately and tried to assault me, and they didn't charge it. And so to me, that was always really offensive. The officers, as a kid, I had to call. So we called the police, they came over, they did nothing. So I called back as a 12-year-old and I said, you sent somebody over here, they didn't collect this, there's physical evidence in my house, they didn't collect it. They didn't ask me for a statement. They didn't ask us to ID anybody. Can you please come back? And they did, and they ended up charging one very low misdemeanor charge against something that this guy had done to my sister in a different room, but nothing against me. So I had always just held that sort of as a grudge, something failed in the system there. And so I'm sure that was part of it. If I go to law school, maybe I can learn a little more about that prosecutorial side of that.
Very cool. Okay, so you're saying that Jared had the faith crisis first, huh?
Yes.
So you were still your Orthodox believer when something happened to Jared?
Yep.
All right. When was this, and talk about what happened?
So I didn't know, obviously, because he was very quiet about it, and also just very kind and patient about it, I think. So, but it was before we moved out here. So it would have been, I think, probably 2012 maybe, that he started kind of feeling this way. And I think the impetus for him, and I hope I'm not putting words in his mouth, but it would have been being in leadership, because he had been called to be the young men's president, and he was going to these meetings and seeing wow, Revelation does not work the way that I thought that it worked. This is much more of a bureaucracy than I thought. I think he was just disappointed in a lot of that. And then he started, reading and thinking and pondering and all of that. And he would bring up things to me in a very discussion kind of a way, because he didn't ever want to be confrontational, which was excellent, I think, on his part. So he wouldn't just come up and say, I learned this thing and this is crazy. He would say, what do you think about this? Or did you know that Joseph Smith was polygamist? Did you know this thing? And then we would discuss it. So for several years that happened, with increasing frequency and increasing intensity, probably.
And that can really make an Orthodox believer nervous. Were you getting nervous?
Absolutely. I try in all things to be very open-minded and very calm, but I'm not. And but I think he used that to gauge how to react. So there were times when he would talk to me and I would just flat out say, I cannot talk about this right now. And then there are other times where I would feel my discussion to him, my responses to him getting very heated, even though the language wasn't necessarily heated. I just get anxious and tight, and he would say, you're getting really upset. We're just talking. We're not making a decision. We're just talking. And I'd have to calm myself down. But reading between the lines, I knew what kind of was going on. And I remember just saying to him, well, are you still praying? Are you still reading? I know you're reading all this other stuff. Are you still reading the scriptures too? And he would kind of inwardly roll his eyes. He didn't roll his eyes at me, but he'd be like, I am in my way. I promise you I am. And I knew he was a good, honest guy. So I was just trying to be okay, just give him the space and let him do that.
And, is one of the most important things you do in the article that we'll get to is you try and sort of convey the mindset of the of the person who's lost their faith, but you're also working really hard to communicate with the mindset of the Orthodox believer. And so as you think about the ways that Orthodox believers mistreat or mischaracterize or misjudge someone who's losing their faith, did you do that to Jared? And if so, in what ways?
Absolutely, which is probably why I feel like those people need to be talked to too, because I wasn't a bad person. I don't know. I mean, I had been taught so long that there were certain things that if you did them, they would lead to apostasy. And it was so clear to me. And I was like so scared that he was just missing the mark. I thought he was looking beyond the mark, so to speak, and he was not doing the fundamental things. And so I'm sure I asking him those questions, if you're doing these, was one of the ways. And other ways he could just tell I was emotional. And there'd be times when I would just say, like, I need a break, and I would go and cry, and I'm sure he could hear me, so yeah.
So did you think one of the things you mentioned in the article is sort of assuming that people are taken over by Satan or a bad influence? Did you kind of wonder that about Jared, that he was being, influenced?
It was a conflict. So my mind knew, and my heart really knew, that he was this really, really good person, like a really, really, really good person and an honest person. And so I was like, that's where my heart, my mind was. But then I had this sort of, I guess, feeling that, maybe he was accidentally like missing the mark. Maybe he was, but I thought if he's not doing these fundamental things, then he's subject to the wiles of whatever Satan wants him to believe, right? So it was a conflict for me. And I remember actually, this is going to sound so weird, and it's going to kind of make any believers who are listening think, oh yeah, I should be more of a believer. But I turned to the scriptures and it actually worked. So I turned and I read 2 Corinthians, I think it was. It's the one where it basically says, if you have an unbelieving spouse, then you stick with them, and who knows but what they might become believing in the future. And so I was like, okay, cool, that's my answer. Let him do what he wants to do. And I, from then on, tried real hard to just, be more understanding.
So did it drive a wedge between you guys, or were you able to stay close during this time?
I think those are sometimes the same thing. So yeah, it drove a wedge, but if you'd ever have a wedge to kind of work on, then you never progress. And so, like we had times where the conversation was difficult, and times where I was mad, and times where he was mad, and we would pause, right? We'd stop and we say, like, we're both upset. Like, let's figure out why we're upset. And then if it's not a good time to talk about it, then we'll calm down and talk about it later. And we did that a lot, and it led to this amount of understanding. So,
okay. So at what point did he how did things start really unfolding? Did he just at some point say, I'm done? Or did you start paying attention and you started going astray? Like, how did it start unraveling in its full form?
From my perspective, and his is probably a little different, but from my perspective, he asked a couple times, like, I'm not going to go to Elders Quorum. Do you care if I just like walk home and you can meet me at home? Or he would just kind of sit out or go run an errand or something. And so to me, that was like the beginning of the end. For him, I was like, whoa, that's like a real thing. Like, you always go to all 3 hours. What are you talking about? And I remember kind of sitting in Relief Society and feeling like just real final about it for him. Like, oh, he's, I'm going to be that person that comes without their husband. And what is this going to look like? And then I, as I said, like, he'd been giving me little things to think about and whatever for a long time. And I just didn't have the time. My job was insane. I was working like 55, 60 hours most weeks. And so I was just trying to find time. So what I finally started doing was I listened to Lindsay Hansen Clark's podcast. And then I had read already a bunch of books on like atheism and mainstream Christianity, things like that, because I had wanted to, before I even knew about Jared, I just wanted to be able to discuss more, like, with my family and other people. So I had read some of those things, and I was starting to sort of crumble away as well. And I think that the main issues I had were like I thought this was a huge conflict between the blacks in the priesthood and and second Nephi. I was like, this is the Book of Mormon. This is the word of the prophet. Like, what am I going to do with this? And there are very few scriptures that are that clear. I could not justify my way around what that scripture was clearly saying. So that was hard for me. And then the podcasts, the Year of Polygamy podcasts, where I was matching up dates and realizing that based on these dates, there had been a grave dishonesty. And I was thinking to myself, like, there are two examples in the scriptures of dishonesty. One is like Abraham being told to say that Sarah was his sister, and the other one is God saying endless punishment isn't actually endless. And those aren't even straight up dishonesty. So I'm like, this is not a thing that God is okay with. God is not okay with dishonesty. That was really, difficult for me. So that was the beginning of the end. And once I knew those things and I started dedicating a little more time to reading and a little less time to reading scriptures, then I was done. So.
And how long ago was that?
Probably it was around October. Yeah, October 2015. So like a year.
So right before the LGBT policy was released by the church.
Yeah. And at that time, I know I was in a mindset of like, okay, a lot of things are imperfect, but maybe I can still work through this. Because I remember when the policy came out, I was like, I kind of prayed about it and read a scripture. And the scripture I opened it up to was like, some things are false. And I was like, okay, good. This was false. So I remember being in that mindset then. So it must have been kind of right after that, probably a month or two after that.
Got it. Okay. All right. So let's check in with our listeners really quick. Neil writes, I love this podcast. Larry writes, the comment, quote, what is this going to look like, unquote, rings so familiar and adds guilt. Mary writes, so relating to this, thank you for sharing. Had some ladies come over to my house in the guise of being friendly neighbors, accused my husband of being an alcoholic or abusive because surely something must be wrong. Well, what do you think about that, Brynne?
It makes me just feel sick to my stomach. The same thing happened to me. I shouldn't compare this, but it's a little bit comparable. So in high school, that happened to me too, because when I started dating Jared and people knew that we were being kind of more touchy than we should be, I had some friends come up and say like, well, I don't think he's a good influence on you. And these were friends who, like, their boyfriends I thought were stalkers. So I was super offended. It felt super hypocritical. They didn't know this person and it wasn't helpful. It's not helpful at all. Like if my husband is an alcoholic and abusive, I probably know that. I mean, granted, there's situations where people need some outside support to get out of real bad situations, but this is not one of those and it doesn't help anybody.
Right. Yeah. One more comment. Matthew writes, John, loving your live podcast from Tokyo. They are so much more personal. So shout out to Matthew in Tokyo. I think that's pretty cool. People can join us from that far away. And then also I'll read Leah. Leah writes, my father was incredibly strict when I had a boyfriend similar to hers. I would always feel immense guilt for arousing him. And after we would kiss too much, I always would beat myself about it. And it bothered me that my boyfriend was never guilted like me, probably due to the fact that my father conducted bishop-like interviews with us kids and always probed how far I was going sexually. Ugh, that would not be fun. I hated bishop interviews during my life because it reminded me how my father lectured and probed into my sexual life. Wow, that doesn't sound fun. Leah, thanks for sharing. What do you have in response to that for Leah, Brynne?
The same thing happened with me. I mean, they want to know how far you went, and I don't get that. And I remember just speaking in negatives because rather than wanting to describe it, I described what we had not done. And yeah, I remember, I hadn't thought about that before, but Jared and I went into at least one of these interviews together. And now I remember it being like I was doing the talking, like I was being questioned and he was sitting there for support. And now I'm like, I don't know why that was. And he went as well to a different bishop later on. And he felt like that bishop was very helpful, but that may have just been bishop roulette. I don't know. So, but the same is true. You kind of made me think of something else, which is when I had started to try to go to therapy, even before college, So in high school, I tried this. One of the therapists that I went to was like real super interested in how far we had gone and was asking me a lot of details about it on the like first time I had been there. So I don't know if I don't know if I can really make a conclusion about that, but it is very off-putting for sure.
Definitely. Kimberly writes, Brynne, you are incredible. So proud of you and everything you've had the courage to share. Let's see. All right. And I should just add that we have over 200 people now joining us live. That's a very large number for a Facebook Live broadcast. So I just want to welcome everyone who's joined us through Facebook Live. We're so glad to have you. We want to encourage you to make more comments or ask questions. Again, the article that we're going to be discussing is linked to in the description of the Facebook post. And it's called They Can Leave the Church, but They Can't Leave the Church Alone, by Brynne Thomas Gant. Okay, so now, you know, for years you were looking at Jared with some suspicion or some concern, and then in your narrative you joined the ranks of the non-believers. How were you treated by family and friends once you fell into the same category as Jared?
Well, I think I had it a little easier in some ways than other people because I had these 7 siblings, most of whom I felt like would be probably even not more accepting, but easier for me to talk to once I left. So
now in adulthood, most of your siblings just didn't stay engaged in the church?
Nope. So, and even as younger kids, so there's 7 of them and I'm going through. Yeah, I mean, there's 2 that I think identify LDS. They're definitely not Orthodox. And
Liz, by the way, your sister Liz just posted, I'm so proud of my sis. So Liz is tuning in.
Yep, she's actually sister-in-law, but we call each other sis because it's awesome.
Oh, okay, so, cool. All right. Hi, Liz.
She's Jared's older sister.
Got it. Okay, so were your siblings supportive?
Yeah. You know, we have so many people in our family that some of the relationships are closer than others because you just don't have the time and ability to be super close with everybody. But my oldest sister is super duper supportive. She always has been, really. And, you know, next to her, so Julie's supportive, Tammy's supportive, Anne's supportive. Carmen is one of the ones that's active. I haven't heard anything rude from her. Like, it's not like she came out and never said anything mean to me. She's been supportive. And Shauna is her name. She's treated me exactly the same.
So have you and Jared experienced any of the treatment sort of outlined in your article?
Yeah. I mean, so my siblings are the one exception. And I think my parents have been mostly the same, except that the default issue is I can't really talk to them about almost anything anymore because they're very, very believing in a very deep spiritual sort of way. Like less, I mean, they do all the right things on the surface as well, but it's more than that. It's like they, you know, anything they think about in life is colored by the church, just like I talk about there. And so the discussions are different. I don't talk to them a lot anyway. I kind of wish we were able to talk more, but they have a lot on their plates that, you know, they help some of my other siblings. And so that changed sort of just by default. And then, you know, Jared's relationship with his mom actually has been great. She's been very, very understanding and accepting and just kind to us. And then his dad, you know, he's got some other complications going on as well, but his dad doesn't really call him anymore. So, I mean, there's that. And then his brother, interestingly, was also very upset by some of the life changes, even though he's not active. And so that was sort of surprising to Jared. And then we've had some friends and stuff that some of the friends have stayed the same. Some of them, I think by default, you only talk to them at church. And so we don't get the opportunity to see them much anymore. I've had a few that have reached out and just said, hey, like, I don't get to talk to you very much. Like, how are things going? And then I've had some people email and say, you are making the wrong choice. I don't believe you. You're lying. You're going to hell and you're going to hate your life in 10 years. So.
You have had people reach out like that.
Yeah.
What's that like?
It didn't affect me as much as I thought it would. Sometimes I get real stressed out about that stuff. It affected me enough that I responded in sort of a mean way in most of the instances. But then I sort of calmed down and let it go. So it's just not fun. I mean, and the thing about it that's not fun is it feels real unfair. Like you want to go back and explain. You want people to understand it. And I think the irony of it is, had I been a believing Mormon, I would have thought there would have been a time when everybody would know the truth. And now I'm like, dang it, I don't even know if there's a time when they're going to see that they're wrong. They might just die and turn into dust, and then I'll never be vindicated, and it's upsetting. But
Yeah. Yeah. So it's hard to be attacked, and it's hard to be judged, and it's hard to be written off. And especially when you feel like you're doing something from a place of being informed, from a place of being courageous, of loving truth, of doing what is right. I'm guessing. Does that ring true to you as well?
Yep.
Yeah.